Picture a medieval peasant. You already have one in your head. Hollywood put him there. He's caked in mud from his hairline to his bare feet, as if he sleeps in a ditch and considers it an upgrade. His teeth are 3 brown stumps. Flies orbit him in a loyal little halo. He drinks ale for breakfast because 1 sip of water would kill him where he stands. He empties his chamber pot onto the head of whoever walks below his window. He has never touched soap because soap has not been invented, and he will die at 30 looking 80, having bathed exactly once at his baptism, screaming. Now add the sound design, the squelch, the grunting, the cheerful narrator explaining that everyone simply accepted the filth because they knew no better, because the church told them washing was a sin, because this was the Dark Ages and darkness apparently smells. Almost none of that is true, and I don't mean it's exaggerated. I mean that most of it is provably, documentably false, and some of it is not just false, but backwards. The filthiest centuries in European history came after the Middle Ages ended, and the people who invented the myth of the unwashed medieval peasant were, in several cases, washing less than he did. Tonight we're going to take that mud-caked man apart, 1 lie at a time, 10 of them. The 10 biggest lies about medieval hygiene that you still believe, that I believed, that nearly everyone believes, counted down from the merely wrong to the spectacularly, historically backwards. And we're not going to do it with opinions. We're going to do it with tax rolls and guild statutes and court records and monastery plumbing diagrams, because the strange, wonderful thing about medieval people is that they wrote everything down. They wrote down what a steam bath cost. They wrote down who was fined for dumping filth in the gutter. They wrote down the recipe for tooth powder and the wages of the men who cleaned the cesspits, and the exact hour the bathhouse crier was allowed to start shouting in the street. The mud is a costume we put on them later. The paperwork is theirs, and the paperwork survives. One promise before we start, because this channel runs on it. First, every lie tonight gets measured against documents. Real years, real towns, real names where names were recorded. And whenever we cross the line from what the records prove into what historians merely suspect, or into pure legend, I will tell you, every time you'll hear it clearly. This part is in the ledger. This part is a story someone told 200 years later. Second promise, this is not going to be a whitewash. Medieval people were not secretly Scandinavian spa enthusiasts. They had lice, nearly all of them, nearly all the time. Washing in January, in an unheated room, in water hauled by hand, took a courage you and I have never needed. And when the Great Plague came, it did things to Europe's bathing culture that we'll get to at the very end of tonight's list, because that catastrophe is the hinge this whole myth swings on. The truth isn't that the Middle Ages were clean. The truth is that they tried, hard, constantly, at real expense, and that the trying is written down, and that we have spent 500 years laughing at them for a filth that mostly belonged to other centuries. And one more thing, so we're honest about the method. The documents tonight are real. The prices, the statutes, the lawsuits, the dates. But the eyes I'm going to lend you, the servant girl at the inn, the barber's apprentice, the man lowered into the cesspit at midnight, those are borrowed eyes, composites, stitched together from the records of 100 real people whose names were never written next to their work. The rooms are real. The wages are real. The hands are invented so that you can be inside them. I'll never pretend otherwise. So I make these history stories, and at this point I've honestly given up trying to figure out whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who find 14th-century cesspit litigation soothing. Either way, no judgment, it is weirdly soothing. Subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Dim whatever needs dimming. Here we go. Lie number 10. Medieval people were proud of being dirty, and the proof, you've heard, is that Queen Isabella of Castile boasted she had bathed only twice in her whole life, once when she was born, and once on her wedding day. You have heard this. Everyone has heard this. It's the crown jewel of the genre, the line that gets trotted out at dinner parties whenever the Middle Ages come up, usually with a little shudder. Sometimes it's Isabella. Sometimes the same two baths get assigned to other famous bodies. This channel has already spent a whole night with the royalty version of these legends and the perfumed courts of later kings, so we won't reopen those doors tonight. Tonight is not about queens, but we start with Isabella's two baths because the legend does something sneaky. It takes one sentence about one woman and smears it across 20 generations of ordinary people. If a queen only bathed twice, the logic goes, imagine the peasants. So let's do exactly that. Let's imagine the peasants accurately. It is a March evening in 1494 in Medina del Campo, in the Kingdom of Castile, and your arms are full of towels. You're 15 years old, and you work at an inn on the road that carries the wool merchants north. Flemish buyers, Burgos middlemen, mule drivers with dust worked so deep into the creases of their necks that it looks tattooed there. The great spring fair has filled every bed in town, 2 and 3 men to a mattress, and your whole evening, every evening, is water. Hauling it, heating it, pouring it, mopping it up. Because here is the thing nobody puts in the movies. Before these men will sit down to eat, they wash, all of them, every night. It is not optional. It is not eccentric. It is not even a virtue exactly. It is manners, drilled in so deep that skipping it marks a man the way spitting on the table would. You stand at the end of the board with a brass ewer of warmed water, a basin, and the towels, and you go down the line, and each merchant holds his hands over the basin while you pour. The water comes out steaming in the cold room. Wine-coloured dust runs off their fingers. The Fleming rubs his knuckles like he's angry at them. The old Burgos man washes to the wrist precisely, the same 15 strokes every night, then takes the towel from your shoulder without looking at you, because you are furniture, and dries each finger separately. You know the order of it the way you know your prayers, and in fact you learned both the same way. Every child does. There are books for the children of better houses, courtesy books they're called, whole-rhymed manuals of table manners, and they all say the same things. Wash your hands before eating, and let it be seen that you washed them. Keep your nails clean and short. Don't scratch your head at the table. Don't put back on the platter what your fingers have touched. You've never read one. You can't read. But you don't need to, because the rules run downhill, from the castle to the merchant's house to your mother's table, and your mother enforced clean hands with a wooden spoon, and a speed that would have impressed any queen. After supper the washing starts again, in the other direction. The kitchen girl scrubs the pots with sand and ash. You carry the basins out, refill the big copper, bank the fire under it, because 2 of the merchants have paid extra for hot water in their rooms tonight, and one, the Fleming, has asked for the tub. The tub is oak, bound with iron, big enough for a man to sit in with his knees folded up, and filling it takes you 11 trips with the yoke and buckets, up the back stairs, trying not to slop. By the 9th trip your shoulders are burning and your wet sleeves have gone cold against your wrists, and you're cursing the entire county of Flanders under your breath. This is the part the myth gets almost right, by accident. Bathing wasn't rare because people hated water. It was expensive because water was heavy. Every hot bath in Europe for 1,000 years was carried up a staircase on somebody's shoulders. Remember that. Remember the weight of it. It's going to matter all night. Later, when the hall is quiet and the fire is down to its red skeleton, you get what's left. That's the arrangement. It's half your pay. The Fleming's bath water has gone cloudy and lukewarm. But lukewarm is a luxury and you know it, and you sit in another man's cooling water in the dark kitchen with a lump of real soap. White soap, olive oil soap, the good kind, a sliver the cook shaved off the household block for you. And you scrub a week off your skin. You wash your hair and drag the comb through it. The boxwood comb your mother gave you, fine teeth on one side, coarse on the other. The fine side is for the lice. Everyone owns a comb like this. Everyone. When the archaeologists dig up medieval towns 500 years from now, they will find these double-sided combs in their thousands. Bone, boxwood, antler, ivory for the rich. In every stratum, in every country, and every single one of them is a small, patient argument against the legend of the people who didn't care. Keep that comb in your mind too. We'll come back to it. Now step out of her body, back up here to me, and let's look at what the records actually say, and what they don't. Here's what they don't say. They don't say Isabella of Castile bathed twice in her life. There is no contemporary document, no letter, no chronicle, no ambassador's report, no household account, in which Isabella says this, or anyone says it about her. Historians have gone looking repeatedly because the line is so famous, and they come back empty every time. What we do have is her household accounts, which record, among 1,000 other things, purchases of scented soaps and orange flower water, and the fact that the royal palaces of Castile had bathing rooms in the Andalusi style. Because if there was one thing the Iberian kingdoms had inherited in abundance from centuries of living beside Al-Andalus, it was baths. There is a related legend that her daughter, or Isabella herself, vowed not to change her shift until a siege was won, and that story too walks around without a single medieval document holding its hand. Which is exactly what I promised to tell you. The two baths line isn't a documented fact about a queen. It's a legend, probably born long after her death, in the wars of reputation between nations and faiths, when calling your enemies dirty was ordinary ammunition, and it survives because it's deliciously repeatable. That's all a lie needs sometimes, not evidence, just rhythm. But the courtesy books are real, and they are everywhere. From the 12th century onward, in Latin, French, English, German, Italian, they pile up. Rhymed rules for children and squires and apprentices, and hand-washing before meals is in essentially all of them, not as advice, but as the absolute floor of decency. Real households were built around the habit, the ewer and basin at the door of the hall, the aqua manile, a bronze water jug shaped like a lion or a knight on horseback, and museums are full of them, carried to each guest in order of rank. Washing your hands where everyone could see wasn't just cleanliness. It was a performance of belonging to the human race. So where does the pride in dirt idea come from? Mostly from us needing the past to be a punchline, and from a real thing twisted out of shape. There were medieval people who refused washing, certain hermits and extreme ascetics who gave up baths the way they gave up meat and beds and conversation, as a mortification, a spectacular self-punishment. And here's the detail that turns the whole lie inside out. Their contemporaries found it remarkable. It got written down precisely because it was extraordinary. You don't earn sainthood points for skipping something nobody does anyway. The dirty hermit is not evidence that medieval people didn't wash. He's evidence that they did, and that everyone understood exactly how much it cost a man to stop. The girl in Medina del Campo never heard of any of them. She finishes her borrowed bath, dries herself on the least damp towel, braids her wet hair by the embers, and goes to sleep clean in the small, temporary, hard-won way that is the only way anyone got to be clean before boilers and taps. Twice a life? She's washed more people than that since Tuesday. Lie number 9. Nobody in the Middle Ages cared about bad smells. They lived in stench from birth, so their noses simply gave up, and the whole rotten world smelled like nothing to them. It sounds almost scientific when people say it. Noses adapt, don't they? Spend a lifetime beside a dunghill and the dunghill disappears. So the medieval world, the story goes, was one enormous smell that nobody smelled. An entire civilization walking around with its nose switched off. There's a quick way to test whether a society notices smell. You look at what it spends money on, and you look at what it sues over. The Middle Ages spent money on smell constantly, and they sued over it with a fury that fills entire archive shelves. But let's start with the money, because the money smells wonderful. It is a raw grey morning in July of 1385 in Norwich, one of the great cities of England. Wool money, church spires, 10,000 chimneys, and you're up to your elbows in lavender. You are a widow of 41, and you rent a stall in the market and a strip of garden ground outside the walls, and what you sell, roughly speaking, is the way things ought to smell. Lavender in bound bundles cut this week, so that the oil still bites your skin when you handle it and your hands go to sleep smelling like a linen chest. Rosemary, hyssop, sweet flag from the riverbanks, the long green blades that the better households scatter on their floors, because a proper hall gets a fresh layer for guests, and when the old layer is swept out and the new goes down and feet crush it, the whole room breathes out green. Meadowsweet, which the country people call the queen of the meadow. Put it under the rushes and a room smells of honey and almonds for a week. Dried rose petals by the pint measure, wormwood and tansy against fleas, southernwood against moths, sold to every housewife in the parish with strict instructions, which they already know, because their mothers taught them, which is how you learned. Your best customers this morning are 2, the steward of a merchant's house on King Street and the sexton. The steward buys armfuls. His master has guests from London, and before those guests arrive, the hall floor will be stripped, swept, strewn fresh, the cushions beaten in the yard, the privy seat scrubbed, and a bunch of your hyssop hung inside the shaft. 'Cause yes, that is a thing people do, hanging herbs in the privy, 'cause they mind the smell. That's the entire reason you have a trade. Every bundle you sell is a receipt with a meaning printed on it. Somebody minded. The sexton buys rosemary and bay for a funeral, sprigs for the mourners to carry and to cast into the grave, sweetness held against the fact of death. And while you count his change, he complains at length. And this is the part I need you to hear, because complaining about smell is possibly the single best documented ordinary activity of the entire medieval city. The sexton is furious about the dyers by the river. The dyers steep their cloth in woad, and fermenting woad smells like a stable fire in hell, and when the wind comes off the water, the whole parish knows it. There have been words. There will be more words before the Leet Court, which is where Norwich takes such grievances, and the court rolls of this city, parchment, real, surviving, readable today, are stuffed with them. presentments against neighbours for stinking muck heaps, against butchers for casting offal where honest people walk, against anyone whose private filth becomes the street's problem, fines assessed in pennies, repeat offenders named year after year like old familiar sinners. Stop and feel how strange that is, if the myth were true. You cannot sue a man over a smell nobody can smell. Every one of those complaints, and England's towns produce thousands of them, is a nose, working, offended, and willing to pay court fees about it. Your own nose has a map of Norwich on it, finer than any drawn map. Walking home, you could name the streets blindfolded. The hot fat and burnt sugar note of the cook shops, the wet iron smell of the smith's quarter, fresh bread here, tallow there, the fish market announcing itself 2 streets early, and the tanneries you smell before anything, which is exactly why they aren't beside you. And that's the next piece of paper the myth has to explain away. Medieval towns zoned their smells. By custom and by ordinance, the foul trades, tanners who soak hides in lime and dung and worse, fullers, butchers with their slaughter waste, get pushed to the edges, downwind, downstream, outside the walls, and when they creep back in, the courts push again. London spent much of the 14th century in a running legal war with its own butchers over exactly where slaughter waste could be carried and dumped, with King and Parliament weighing in, because the smell near the shambles was declared, in the official language of the day, an abomination and a corruption of the air. Corruption of the air. They didn't just notice smell, they feared it. Their best medical theory, inherited from the ancient world, held that rotten air, miasma, was itself a cause of disease. They were wrong about the mechanism. We know now it was the germs and not the odour. But be careful before you laugh, because look at what the wrong theory made them do. Move the dung, flush the gutter, strew the herbs, carry the sweetness. A wrong reason for doing many right things. And above all this ordinary municipal smell management floats a whole luxury economy of scent that the myth has no room for at all. Rosewater, imported and distilled for washing the hands of guests. Pomanders, little pierced metal globes of ambergris and spices hung at the belt, warmed in the palm. Scented soaps. Lavender laid between every layer of stored linen in every chest that could afford it, which is very nearly every chest. The word lavender itself grew up next to the Latin for washing, and the laundresses of the era were called lavenders. The smell of clean laundry was so beloved that it became a standard image in poetry for innocence. These are not the habits of a civilization with its nose switched off. These are the habits of a civilization that thought about smell all the time. More than we do, arguably, because for them it was morality and medicine and class and comfort all braided together. Now, the honest part, the part I promised. Did the medieval city smell by your standards and mine? Yes, unquestionably. Wood smoke always. Horse everywhere, the way our streets smell of exhaust. Wet wool, tallow candles, open drains on a hot day, and human beings who worked hard in clothes that were brushed and aired more often than they were washed. A time traveller would flinch, the first hour. But the first hour is the point. Our traveller would adapt within days, exactly as the widow's nose has tuned itself, not to nothing, but to the baseline, above which every wrong note still rang out loud and actionable. The myth says they smelled nothing. The court rolls say they smelled everything, and minded, and wrote it down, and made somebody pay. She sells out of lavender by mid-afternoon, which always feels like a small blessing, ties the empty sacking into a roll, and walks home through the smell map of her city. Bread, iron, fat, fish, Green River air, with 4.5 more than she had at dawn, earned entirely from the noses of Norwich. The evening meal is pottage with her own garden's herbs in it. Her sheets, when she finally lies down between them, smell of the lavender that never made it to market, and outside the window the rain starts, and rain on a strewn floor city is its own smell, and she knows that one too. Somebody minded. Keep those 2 words. They're going to be the quiet refrain under everything else tonight. Lie number 8. Medieval mouths were graveyards. Everyone over the age of 20 grinning through a fence of black stumps, teeth rotting out of every head, and dentistry nothing but a man with pliers and a strong arm. This one feels so obviously true that questioning it seems rude. No toothpaste, no dentists, no fluoride. Of course their teeth were horrors. Every film agrees. Casting directors pay good money to paint healthy modern teeth brown before the cameras roll, because an actor with clean teeth in a medieval scene looks to us like a mistake. Here is what the ground says. When archaeologists lift medieval skeletons out of English churchyards, and they have lifted thousands from York, from London, from village cemeteries ploughed up by railways and ring roads, they count the cavities. It's routine work. Teeth outlast everything. Teeth are the diary the body keeps. And across dig after dig, the counts come back looking the same way. In most medieval burial populations, only somewhere around 1 tooth in 5 shows decay at all, and plenty of adults go into the ground with every tooth sound. Set that beside the mouths of later centuries, beside the Georgians with their sugar bowls, beside the Victorians beside us, where decay touches nearly everyone, and the ranking flips. On cavities alone, the peasant of 1367 was very likely walking around with a healthier smile than the average person you passed on the street today. The reason is brutally simple, and it costs about a shilling. Sugar. In 14th century England, sugar is an import from the far edge of the world, sold by apothecaries alongside medicines, at prices that could reach a shilling or 2 the pound, and a shilling is several days' wages for a labourer. Ordinary people sweeten with honey when they sweeten at all, which is rarely, and mostly they don't. No sugar, no feast for the bacteria that drill teeth. The whole modern apocalypse of dental decay is waiting politely for the plantation ships of a later age. It hasn't happened yet. Their teeth are clean because the poison hasn't arrived, but they don't know that. What they know is that a fair mouth matters. The poets say white, even teeth when they praise beauty, sweet breath when they praise a kiss, and so they work at it. Come and stand in the shop where that work gets done. It is a Saturday in October of 1367 in York, in a barber's shop 2 doors down from the Minster Yard, and your morning began an hour ago with soot. You are 14, the apprentice, and the first jobs of every day are yours. Unshutter the window, sweep yesterday's hair into the street channel before the neighbours complain. Because they will complain. This is a city that complains beautifully. Set the copper basin of water to warm at the fire, strop the razors, and mix the tooth powder. The powder is the master's own receipt, and he guards it like a relic. But it is not so different from what the physician's books recommend, and you know it by heart because your hands make it. Sage leaves dried on the hearth until they crumble, rubbed through a sieve. White salt, pounded fine in the mortar until your wrist aches. A little pepper, a little burnt rosemary charcoal ground to softness. The smell of it, green, sharp, faintly of Sunday dinner, is the smell of your entire apprenticeship. It goes into a pot on the counter and customers buy it by the pennyworth, folded into twists of cloth. They use it the way everyone uses it, the way the master taught you to demonstrate. Wrap a strip of linen round your finger, wet it, dip it in the powder, and scrub. Teeth and gums both, front and back, then rinse with wine or with water and vinegar and rub the teeth dry. Between whiles, people chew hazel twigs frayed at the end into a little brush, or fennel seed, or parsley for the breath, and pick their teeth, carefully, with quills or with the little pointed instruments that hang from good belts right beside the ear spoon, 'cause a toothpick was a normal piece of personal equipment, sometimes cast in silver, sometimes given as a gift. The great medical compendium that half the physicians of England lean on, written by Gilbertus Anglicus back in the 1240s, gives the whole programme in cold prose. Keep the teeth free of the bits of food that corrupt them, rub them clean, avoid sweet clinging things, and your teeth will keep both their soundness and their colour. That book is 120 years old, and it was repeating advice older still. None of this is secret knowledge. It's on the counter, a penny the twist. Your first customer this morning is a wool merchant who comes in every Saturday to be shaved and have his teeth rubbed and polished, which is a service barbers sell, and you hold the basin under his chin while the master works along the man's teeth with powder and cloth, scouring off the grey film, tartar we'd say, until the merchant runs his tongue over the result and grunts with satisfaction. His teeth are strong and mostly white. He is 51. He got a look at his own reflection in the new glass mirror he bought his wife, he tells the master, and decided the Minster wasn't the only old building in York worth maintaining. The second customer is the other side of the truth, the side I promised not to hide. A carter, cheek swollen tight and shiny, 2 nights without sleep, and there's nothing for it. The tooth has died and has to come out. The master sits him in the strong chair, braces the man's head back against his own chest, and you hold the shoulders, and it is quick. The master is very good. This is a skilled trade with a guild behind it, and York's barbers guard their standards jealously. But quick is not painless, and you feel the carter's whole body go rigid under your hands, and the sound he makes through his nose is one you will remember on your deathbed. Clove oil on a wad of linen afterward, and a cup of strong wine, and instructions, and he pays 4p and walks out lighter by 1 tooth than most of his agony. No, there is no mercy of anaesthesia anywhere in this century. Toothache in 1367 is a small war, and everyone fights it eventually. Because here is the honest ledger of the medieval mouth. Little decay, yes, but heavy wear. Their bread is ground between millstones, and millstones shed grit, and 40 years of gritty bread files teeth down flat the way the sea files glass. Old mouths in medieval graves are worn mouths, sometimes worn to the nerve, cleaner than ours and harder used. Both things are true, and you now know more than the movies do. So where did the black stump grin come from? From a real place. Just, once again, not a medieval one. Fast forward 2 centuries, sugar comes flooding into Europe from the new plantations, its price falls, and the rich gorge. By the reign of Elizabeth I, England's wealthy have discovered sweets the way a toddler discovers them, and it is Elizabethan mouths, including, according to a foreign visitor's blunt account late in the Queen's own reign, mouths at the very top of society blackened by too much sugar, that rot in the historically famous way. Some fashionable ladies, it was said, whose teeth had not yet gone dark, cosmetically blackened them, so as to look rich enough to afford the sugar that was destroying everyone else. Sit with that for a second. The rotten-toothed past is real. It simply begins after the Middle Ages end, at the exact moment the money arrived to pay for the rot. And then storytellers, needing the deep past to look worse than the recent past, quietly slid those black Renaissance teeth backward 300 years into the mouths of peasants who could never have afforded the sugar to earn them. The stumps are a costume too. Filed grit flat, yes. Aching sometimes, yes. Rotten, that was a later century's luxury. By evening the shop is swept, the razors are oiled, the powder pot is lighter by 11 pennyworths, and you clean your own teeth the way you do every night. Linen on finger, sage and salt, the taste of your trade. The master says a barber with foul teeth is a baker with no bread. You rinse, spit into the gutter, and go up to bed with your mouth tingling and clean in the year 1367, without ever once having heard of a dentist, and needing one, if we're counting honestly, rather less than you do. Lie number 7. Everyone in the Middle Ages was sick all the time, riddled with plague from cradle to grave, dead by 30, old at 25, a civilization of invalids stumbling from one epidemic into the next. You've heard the number that props this one up. Average life expectancy in the Middle Ages, 30. It gets repeated like a tombstone inscription for the whole era, and it drags a picture behind it. Grey-faced villagers coughing through their 20s, grandparents a rumour, every cradle already half a coffin. The number is real, the picture is a lie, and the lie is arithmetic. Come stand in the reality first. It is a bright, hard morning in August of 1298, in a village in Huntingdonshire in the east of England. One of those villages we know almost absurdly well, because its lord kept court rolls and account rolls that still exist, listing its people by name year after year, their fines, their quarrels, their acres, their ale, and it is harvest, and you are cutting wheat. You're 26 years old, and you have been swinging a sickle since 4:30 this morning. You know exactly what your body is because harvest tells you every year, the way a bell tells the hour, the low ache across the back that arrives by the second hour, and then, strangely, settles in and becomes furniture. The right forearm thick and hot from 10,000 strokes. The sting of straw-cut skin on your left hand where you grip the stalks. Sweat running into the creases of your neck and drying to salt maps. Around you the whole village is in the field, because at harvest everyone is in the field, and just look at them. Actually look. Because this is the census the myth never takes. There are children everywhere, gleaning behind the reapers, gathering dropped ears into aprons. There are the young and strong, your own rank, doing the cutting. There are men and women in their 40s and 50s, binding sheaves, slower than you, tougher than you, pacing themselves like people who have done 30 harvests and intend to do 10 more. And at the field's edge, in the shade of the hedge with the water jugs and the bread, sits the old widow who held her house and yard through 2 husbands, and quotes your grandfather at you, because she knew him, because she's somewhere past 70 and remembers when the old king was young. Up at the manor court last month, half the jurors, the sworn men whose memories are the village's legal record, were grey-headed. That's the point of them. When the court needs to know who held which strip of land 40 years ago, it asks the men who were there. A village with no old people couldn't run its own institutions. This village runs them every 3 weeks. So where does dead at 30 come from? From averaging the babies. Infant and child mortality in this world is a wound that never closes. Of every 10 children born in the village, 2 or 3 may die before their first birthday, and perhaps only 5 or 6 will live to be adults. Fevers, fluxes, accidents, the terrible arithmetic of a world without antibiotics. Their short lives pull the average down like stones tied to it. But an average is not a prophecy, and here is the number the tombstone version never tells you. The records of the era suggest that an English person who survived childhood and reached 20 could commonly expect to see 50, and often well past it. Reaching 60, 70 was not miraculous. King's clerks, bishops, peasants on court rolls do it constantly. When the psalmist's 70 years and 10 got read aloud in the parish church, nobody in the nave heard science fiction. They heard a reasonable hope. Grandparents were not a rumour, they were the government of the village. And now the word you've been waiting for me to say, plague. Surely you're thinking, plague hovered over all of this, every year, everywhere. No, and this may be the single most misunderstood fact of the entire Middle Ages. In 1298, in this wheat field, plague does not exist. Not as a memory, not as a fear, not even as a word with its modern meaning. The last great pandemic to touch Europe faded out centuries before, back in the age of Justinian. So long ago that no chronicle these villagers could hear read aloud preserves any living dread of it. For hundreds of years, the entire high medieval world of cathedrals and universities, and this village's court rolls, Western Europe was, by the standards of the vast disease catastrophes of history, left alone. People got sick, yes. We'll count that cost honestly in a moment. But the wall-to-wall pestilence of the popular imagination simply was not there. Generations were born, ploughed, married, aged, and died without ever seeing an epidemic worth a chronicle entry. Then, one time, the wall fell in. In 1347, the great mortality came up from the Mediterranean ports, and by 1351 it had killed, the serious estimates run from 1/3 to half or more, of everyone in Europe. It returned in waves for centuries afterward. It was the worst thing that has ever happened to this civilization, and I am not going to soften a syllable of it. And tonight's final lie will show you what it did to the very bathhouses we've been defending. But hear the shape of the truth. That is a catastrophe with a date, a before and an after. The myth takes the worst 5 years in European history and smears them across 500, backwards and forwards, until a villager of 1298, whose entire world has never heard a plague bell, gets painted with buboes he could not have imagined. That's not history. That's taking one photograph of a house fire and captioning it. This is how they always lived. The honest ledger then, because I promised. This villager's world can kill him in ways yours can't touch you. A scythe wound that goes bad. A winter fever with nothing behind it but prayer, broth, and the village healer's willow bark and honesty. Childbirth, which levies its toll on the young women of every parish every year. Bad harvests, and he doesn't know it. But the terrifying rains of 1315 are 17 years ahead of him, and the hunger of those years will kill more of his neighbours than any sickness his generation has seen. Medicine can splint his bones, lance his abscess, dose him with herbs that sometimes truly work, and beyond that it is holding his hand. Nobody sane trades their antibiotics for his world. But sick all the time, walk the field again. Feel your own harvest-hardened back, the forearms that can swing a blade for 12 hours, the appetite that will demolish a half-gallon of pottage at noon. Skeletons from graves like this village's tell the same story the court rolls do. Robust bones, strong muscle attachments, worn joints. the skeletons of people who worked brutally hard for decades, which is not something the chronically dying can do. The myth's origin is almost sweet in its laziness. One true statistic, misread by people who wanted the past to be a horror film, amplified by every screenwriter who needed a village of the damned. The real village is in the rolls. Find twopence for bad ale, arguing about a boundary hedge, burying too many children and loving the ones who lived, and governed by old men with long memories in a world that had not yet, not for centuries yet, heard the word pestilence used about itself. The noon rest comes. You drop into the hedge shade among your neighbours, and the old widow hands you the jug, and her hands, you notice, are cleaner than yours. Rested, watered, briefly human again. You'll cut wheat until the light goes. But before we find out what was in that jug, that's a later lie, and a good one. We have a cauldron waiting. Lie number 6. Medieval people didn't use soap. Soap hadn't been invented, or if it had, it was a rare luxury nobody ordinary ever touched, and real washing had to wait for the modern age. This one has a satisfying shortness to its demolition, because soap is not merely present in the Middle Ages. Soap has streets named after it. Whole cities will end up with their names melted into the word. But we'll get to the streets. First, the smell of the real thing being born. It is a broiling afternoon in June of 1248 in Marseille, the great port of Provence. The harbour this very summer is jammed with shipping and money and noise, because the King of France is gathering his crusade fleet on this coast, and the whole waterfront smells of tar, pine and ambition, and you are stirring a cauldron of soap the size of a rowing boat. You are 17, apprentice to a soap boiler, and your world is 3 ingredients and 1 long patience. Olive oil, the region drowns in it. Green gold, poured in by the jarful until your arms ache from lifting. Ash lye, made from barilla, salt marsh plants burned down to a hard alkaline ash that comes in by ship from the Spanish coast, then steeped in vats until the water turns slick and dangerous. You learned in your first week what strong lye does to skin, and you carry a small white scar on your wrist like an unofficial guild badge. And brine for the finishing. The mixture has been over the fire since before dawn, and your job is the paddle, taller than you are, and the slow figure-8 stroke through liquid the colour of wet sand hour after hour, while the master reads the boil the way a shepherd reads weather, watching how it sheets off the paddle blade, touching a cooled drop to his tongue for the bite of unspent lye, adding brine at the moment of his choosing until the magic happens. The soap curds, gathers, rises, separates, and the spent black liquor underneath can be drawn off and thrown away. Your shoulders burn. Steam has pasted your shirt to your back. The smell is enormous. Hot oil, wet ash, something like bread and something like rain on stone, and you will still smell of it at Mass on Sunday, and the whole parish will know your trade at 10 paces, and there are worse fates, because your trade is respectable, organised, inspected, taxed, and old. That's the detail to hold on to. Nobody in this workshop believes they are inventing anything. Soap boiling here is already generations deep. The city's white olive oil soap is on its way to becoming a byword across the Mediterranean. Down the Spanish coast they boil the same way, and Castile will end up lending its name to the whole family, so that centuries from now, in shops that have never heard of Barilla, fine white soap will still be called Castile soap. Across the water, the soap makers of the Levant have been at it longer still, scenting their bars with laurel oil. Merchants and crusaders have been carrying Aleppo soap home to Europe for 100 years. Genoa boils. Venice boils, Savona boils, a city so identified with the trade that its name is widely said to survive inside the very word for soap in French and Italian, savon, sapone. When your product starts dissolving into the names of things, you have not just been invented, you have been standard for a very long time. Tomorrow the cooled mass will be cut into bars with a wire, stamped with the master's mark, stacked on slatted shelves to cure and harden. Some will sell by the pound across Provence. Some will go aboard the crusade ships because an army floats on more than faith. And some will travel very far north. Which brings us to the street. In London, in the heart of the city, running south off the great market street of Cheapside, there is a lane whose name appears in documents by the 13th century as Soapers' Lane. The lane of the soapers, soap sellers and their trade clustered there so early and so thickly that the dress simply became the product. The same way the streets of ironmongers and bread bakers and candlemakers stamped themselves onto the map of every medieval city. Bristol had its soap makers famous enough to be taxed into the records. So did other towns. Stop and let the logic land, the same logic as the herb seller's stall and the barber's powder pot. Cities do not name streets after products nobody buys. A soaper's lane in the 1200s is a fossil of ordinary shopping, of centuries of Londoners walking down a particular lane, money in hand to buy soap, in a civilization that supposedly hadn't discovered it. And what were they buying exactly? Two broad kinds, and the split tells you everything about who used soap, which is to say, everyone. At the luxury end, the hard white Mediterranean bars, Castile and its cousins, sweet enough for a lady's hands and priced accordingly, and below that, in barrels, the everyday stuff, soft soap, black soap, grey soap, boiled locally from wood ash and tallow or fish oils, jelly thick, harsh, cheap, sold by the pound and bought above all for laundry. Because that's the quiet giant of medieval cleanliness, the one the myth never mentions, the washing of linen. Underneath every medieval outer garment is a linen shirt or shift, worn against the skin precisely so that it, not the wool, takes the sweat, and that linen gets changed and washed as often as its owner can possibly manage, boiled and soaped and beaten on the riverbank stones and spread on hedges to bleach in the sun. The laundress with her bat and her tub of grey soap is one of the most universal working figures of the entire era. In every town, at every castle, on every campaign, armies marched with laundresses. When people couldn't wash their whole body, and in a northern January many sensibly didn't, they washed the layer that lived against the body, which is a far better hygienic bargain than it sounds. A clean shirt every week on a body sponged at the basin beats a filthy shirt on any body, and medieval people would have found our obsession with their bath count strange, because to them visible linen was the score. White at the collar and cuffs meant clean. It was the whole social code of hygiene, worn where everyone could see it. The soap trade only climbs from here. By the later Middle Ages, London's soap makers are substantial enough to petition and squabble like any proud trade. The records of English ports show soap moving in by the ton, and when a 15th century household book lists what a servant should lay out for the master's washing, soap sits in the list as unremarkably as towels. King's accounts buy it perfumed. Peasants render their own from ash and kitchen fat in the yard. Every farm wife knows the trick. It's just the cauldron process in miniature. The stuff is simply everywhere, at every price, for 1,000 years before the myth says it exists. So where did we get the idea that soap is modern? Mostly from the people who sold it to us. The 19th century industrialized soap, cut the tax on it, wrapped it in paper, gave it brand names, and then spent staggering sums on advertising. And advertising needs a before. The soap barons' posters and pamphlets sold cleanliness as civilization itself, the bright new virtue that separated the modern age from the dark and greasy past. Some of the most famous ad campaigns in history are soap campaigns, and their entire grammar was then versus now. Nobody sells you soap by admitting your great-great-grandmother's village had a perfectly good grey soap barrel and a laundress with forearms like a blacksmith. The unwashed medieval peasant wasn't discovered by Victorian science. He was, in a meaningful sense, manufactured by Victorian marketing. The perfect grubby mascot for the before picture. And he sold a lot of soap. Back in Marseille, the light off the harbour has gone copper. The master calls the boil done, the fire is raked out, the cauldron will cool overnight, and your forearms will feel the paddle in their sleep, that phantom figure eight, the way rowers feel oars. You wash at the yard trough, with soap, obviously. The one perk of the trade is seconds, the misshapen ends of bars, and your hands are, if we're honest, the cleanest hands of any apprentice in this entire episode. And you eat chickpeas and saltfish on the workshop step, watching the Crusade fleet's mast lights swaying out in the roads, hundreds of them, like a floating town. In a few weeks the king will sail east. Bars from this workshop, stamped with your master's mark, will sail with him. Soap invented. You've been boiling it since dawn, in a city that was boiling it before your grandfather could walk. For a market older than the kingdom itself. The wire cuts the cooled block into bars tomorrow. The bars cure for weeks, whitening slowly, like the moon coming out of cloud. Patience is most of this trade. Patience and stirring. Lie number 5. Medieval people emptied their chamber pots out the window whenever they pleased. A cheerful splash into the street below, maybe a shouted warning if you were lucky, and nobody thought a thing of it, because the street was the toilet and that was that. Every costume drama has the scene. The window creaks open, the pot tips, some poor soul below gets baptized. Laughter all round. It's practically the establishing shot of the entire Middle Ages. So let me show you what a medieval city actually did about human waste, and I warn you, it involves the highest paid manual labourer in this entire episode. It is a moonless night in April of 1372 in London, in a yard off a lane near Cheapside, and you are being lowered into a cesspit by 2 men who keep making the same joke. You are a gong firmer. The polite records say cleanser of privies. The street says gong farmer, and worse. And you say, when asked, that you're in the treasury business because you are paid like it. Tonight's job is a stone-lined pit beneath the privy of a mercer's house. A proper pit, walled like a well, which is what building regulations in this city have been pushing for since the ordinances of the last century laid down exactly how far any cesspit must sit from the neighbour's boundary. 2.5 feet if walled in stone, 3.5 if earth. Measured, written down, enforced by inspection when neighbours complain, and neighbours always complain. You've been hired off the back of exactly such a complaint. The pit is over full, the neighbour's cellar wall is weeping, the ward has spoken, and the mercer is paying to make the problem go away. Paying you. The work is exactly as bad as you think, and you do it anyway, and here is why. The money. The going rates for pit emptying in this city's accounts run to shillings where ordinary labour earns pence. A big job can cost the householder more than a craftsman makes in a week, split between a master gong firmer and his crew. You work by night because the law says so. This cargo does not travel by daylight. with cressets burning at the pit mouth, a tripod, a bucket on a rope, and a wooden tank cart waiting in the lane. Stripped to shirt and leather apron, you go down the ladder into warm, thick, eye-watering dark, and you shovel, and the bucket rises and falls, and the men above tip it into the cart and lower it back, and the same joke comes down at you every third bucket. Gold down there yet? Because night soil is called night soil, and gong farmers famously find things. Dropped rings, spoons. Once, a man swears, a purse of coins some thief had panicked into a privy. Mostly you find what you'd expect. Your palms burn through by midnight. The ammonia sits behind your eyes like a headache with a grudge. And when the pit is scraped clean to its stone floor, you come up the ladder into the April air, and the ordinary smell of a London night, smoke, river, horses, tastes like a meadow. The cart rolls before dawn, out through the gates to the lay stalls and the waiting barges, because this city moves its filth by water, downstream, away, and, a great deal of it, out to the fields and market gardens, because night soil is fertilizer and the countryside pays for it. There is an entire municipal metabolism here, rakers employed by the wards who sweep the streets and cart refuse to the lay stalls, scavengers, sworn officers who inspect and present offenders, surveyors of the pavement, and above them all the ward courts and the cities a size of nuisance, where Londoners drag each other, decade after decade, over exactly the sins the myth says nobody minded. And this is where it gets genuinely fun, because the parchment survives, and the parchment has names. In 1314, one Alice Wade was hauled up because she had rigged a wooden pipe from her indoor privy into the rainwater gutter that was supposed to flush the public latrine, an unauthorised sewer connection in 1314, and the neighbours objected in legal Latin because the stench backed up, and she was ordered to remove it. In 1321, the residents of Ebgate Lane went to law because two householders had built privies jutting out over the lane whose contents fell on the heads of passers-by. And stop, hold that one up to the light. The falling filth is real. It happened, and it was actionable. The people below did not laugh and accept the Middle Ages. They sued. That is the entire difference between the myth and the truth, compressed into one stinking lane. The behaviour existed, and the society treated it as an outrage, which is precisely why we know about it. You do not build a court system around things nobody minds. Somebody minded. Somebody always minded. The city's ordinances say it straight. Casting filth into the streets and lanes, dumping into the Thames or the Walbrook, letting your pig roam, presentable offences punishable by fines that appear in the records again and again, backed eventually by statute at the level of Parliament itself, because in 1388, 16 years after your night in the pit, the realm passes what historians like to call the first National Sanitation Act in English history, forbidding the casting of dung and filth into rivers and ditches on pain of serious money. Enforcement was imperfect. Enforcement is always imperfect. Look at your own city's littering fines, and in a town of wooden buckets and no drains, accidents and midnight shortcuts happened, and the poorest lanes were fouler than the records of the rich ever admit. That's the honest residue at the bottom of this lie. Medieval streets were not clean by our standards, and a chamber pot did sometimes go out a window, but it went out the window the way a bag of garbage goes out a car window today, illegally, resentfully witnessed, and occasionally expensively. It was a violation of the system, not the system. because the system, when you step back, is astonishing for its age. Public latrines. London maintained them, including a famous multi-seat house over the river at the bridge, and others set over the tidal streams to flush with the ebb. The greatest of them, built with money left by the mayor you have definitely heard of, Richard Whittington, would seat scores of Londoners at once over a channel scoured twice a day by the tide. Private houses of any substance dug and lined their pits by code. A trade of licensed night workers emptied them for premium pay. The waste left town by cart and barge on a schedule, toward buyers in the fields. Officers inspected, courts fined, Parliament legislated. Amsterdam, Paris, the Italian cities, same picture, local flavours. It creaks, it smells on hot days, it loses badly in the poorest wards. It is also unmistakably a civilization taking its own filth seriously, 400 years before the flush toilet. So where's the myth from? Partly from the real accidents, inflated. But mostly, and by now you can sing this chorus with me, from a later century, the famous cry of Gardyloo, the shouted warning before the pot flies, the image that stars in every "the past was disgusting" listicle, that's documented not from medieval London, but from Edinburgh in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Enlightenment, powdered wigs, David Hume dodging splashes on the high street, a tall tenement city whose sanitation had genuinely broken down under crowding. Once again the timeline runs backwards. The vivid filth is real, and it is modern, and it got projected onto the Middle Ages because the Middle Ages can't sue. You, meanwhile, have been paid 4 shillings for the night's crew, your share heavy in your palm. Call it 2 weeks of a labourer's wages for one unspeakable night, and the mercer's clerk hands it over at arm's length, and you take a small professional pleasure in counting it slowly. Then you do what every gong firmer does at the end of a job, and what you are now uniquely qualified to appreciate. You go and wash, thoroughly, with soap, in heated water, and nobody in London finds that surprising because, as the whole rest of tonight keeps proving, the facilities exist. The sky over the rooftops is going grey. The rakers are already out with their brooms. The city smells, to your connoisseur's nose, almost sweet. Lie number 4. Medieval towns were open sewers. No clean water, no street cleaning, no infrastructure of any kind, just a maze of filth where you drank from the same brown ditch your neighbour dumped in, because the very idea of public sanitation hadn't been invented. We've already met the gong firmers and the rakers and the nuisance courts, so you can feel this lie wobbling before we even push it. But this one deserves its own demolition, because it's not really about waste. It's about the idea underneath, that public works, water supply, civic engineering, the whole notion of a town taking care of its people's health, arrived with the modern age. And against that idea I want to set one building. A little stone house in the middle of a London street, with brass taps on it, and spring water inside that has travelled 3 miles underground to reach you. It is just after dawn on a Monday in May of 1340 in Cheapside, the widest, richest, loudest street in England, and you are standing in the queue at the great conduit, with a wooden tankard on your shoulder that holds 3 gallons and weighs, full, about as much as a 4-year-old child. You are a water-bearer, a cob. The street calls your kind. You are 38. You've done this for 11 years, and your right shoulder has a permanent leather-hardened groove in it that your wife calls your gutter. Your working capital is the tankard, coopered oak, iron-bound, plugged at the top, and your route. some 24 households and shops that pay you by the load to bring them their water, day in, day out, because they have no well, or their well sits too close to somebody's pit and tastes of it, or they simply prefer the sweet water. That's the actual name for what you carry. Sweet water. The city makes the distinction constantly. River water for washing and industry, well water where the wells are good, and this, the conduit spring water for drinking and cooking, piped from the springs at Tyburn, west beyond the walls, through buried elmwood and lead pipes laid generations ago, running downhill the whole gentle way by nothing but gravity, into the cistern of the little stone building in the middle of Cheapside where a tap fills your tankard with a sound like a horse drinking. Stand in the queue and feel how ordinary it is. That's the miracle, the ordinariness. Ahead of you, 2 other cobs, a brewer's man with a barrel on a handcart, a scatter of servant girls with jugs, an apothecary's boy. The city granted the springs and got the pipes laid back in the 1230s. The agreement for the Tyburn Springs was sealed more than a century ago in your grandfather's grandfather's London, and the water has run ever since, maintained by wardens of the conduit, actual named officials who answer for it, funded by city money and by charges on the heavy users. The brewers, who take water by the barrel for ale, are supposed to pay and are periodically caught cheating and fined and grumble and cheat again. There are years when the brewer's abstraction from the conduit becomes a full civic scandal, argued before the mayor because ordinary householders' pots come first. Think about what that fight means. A city with limited clean water, publicly piped, is arguing, in court on the record, about fair allocation between industry and households. That is water politics. That is a municipal utility in 1340, and London is nowhere near unique. It's not even the most impressive. Bristol laces itself with conduits, several run by religious houses and shared with the town. Exeter, 6 years from now in 1346, will begin driving actual walk-through stone tunnels under its streets to carry and maintain its water pipes. Vaulted underground passages, tall enough for a workman, built solely so the city's plumbing can be repaired without digging up the road, and you can walk through them today. They survive. They're a tourist attraction with a gift shop. Southampton, Gloucester, Coventry, conduits. Dublin, a piped civic supply from the 1240s. On the continent, the story only gets grander. The fountain systems of Italian cities, Siena's underground aqueduct galleries feeding its great public fountains, the spring-fed supplies of German towns, and behind a huge share of it, the quiet expertise of the monasteries which had been building pressurized, filtered, settling-tanked water systems inside their own walls since the 12th century. We'll walk through one in a little while when we deal with the church, and which happily exported the engineering. The idea that clean public water is a Victorian invention would have puzzled the wardens of the great conduit into laughter. They were the 3rd generation to hold the job. Meanwhile, under your feet, pavement, actual pavement. Cheapside is paved, has been for ages, and the city collects a toll called pavage, granted by the Crown, specifically to fund paving and its repair, and property holders are answerable for the stretch fronting their door, and there are surveyors of the pavement who present defaulters, and the records are full of orders to mend this lane and gravel that one, because a great city on clay turns to porridge every November without it. Down the middle or the sides of the street runs the kennel, the drainage channel, engineered with a fall so that rainwater scours it toward the streams and the river. And yes, people were forever sneaking filth into the kennels they shouldn't. And yes, the rakers were forever sweeping it out again, ward by ward, with their carts and their wages in the city's accounts. Not a sewer system in our sense. The true buried sewer for foul waste belongs to later centuries, but drainage, deliberately built and endlessly, grumpily maintained. An open sewer is what a street becomes when nobody's responsible for it. These streets had names attached to their filth. The householder answerable for his frontage, the raker answerable for his ward, the warden answerable for his conduit, all the way up to a mayor answerable to a very complaining public. The system leaked, flooded, clogged, and failed in the poorest margins. Your root skirts, lanes down by the shambles where you keep the tankard shoulder to windward, and I won't pretend otherwise. But responsibility ran all the way down every street in the city. That's not an open sewer, that's a utility map. By mid-morning you've made 6 deliveries. A halfpenny here, a farthing there. The fishmonger's wife pays weekly, the scrivener pays late. The old priest tips you a mug of ale for carrying his water up the stairs, and you drink it on his step while he tells you, as he tells you every week, that the water in Rome ran through aqueducts a mile in the sky, and you tell him, as you tell him every week, that Rome sounds lovely, but Tyburns is colder. 11 years, 2 tankards worn out, 1 shoulder groove. You're a moving part in a machine the size of a city, one of hundreds of cobs, and when your guild brothers gather at the alehouse, the talk is pure waterworks. Which taps run slow, which pipes the wardens are lifting this summer, whether the brewers will finally be made to pay. Infrastructure gossip in 1340. So why does the open sewer picture own our imagination? Because a real open sewer catastrophe did happen in London in the 19th century. When the city's population exploded past 2 million, the old system of pits and nightmen and streams collapsed under a load no medieval city ever dreamed of. The new water closets flushed everything into the Thames, and in the hot summer of 1858 the river rotted so spectacularly that Parliament soaked its own curtains in chloride of lime and seriously debated moving out of the building. They called it the Great Stink, and it is one of the most vividly documented environmental disasters in urban history, and it happened 500 years after the morning I've just shown you, in the age of railways and telegraphs. The Victorians, having finally engineered their way out of it with magnificent sewers, then wrote the history books, and in those books the filth they had just escaped needed somewhere to live, and it could not live in their own fathers' lifetimes. So it moved to the Middle Ages. An embarrassing relative gets edited into a distant branch of the family tree. The brown ditch you're picturing is real. It's just Victorian. Noon. You set the tankard down at the conduit for the last fill of the morning shift, and while it drums and gurgles you flex your fingers and watch the street. The goldsmiths' shops with their glinting windows, the paving crew relaying sets outside the mercery, the raker's cart, the whole loud, self-maintaining machine of it. The tap runs cold over your wrist. 3 miles of buried pipe 100 years old, and the water still tastes faintly of stone and rushes, which is the taste of somebody, long dead, having planned ahead. Sweet water. Their words. Drink it while it's cold, because the next lie is about exactly this, about what medieval people supposedly never dared to drink at all. Lie number 3. Nobody in the Middle Ages drank water. The water was so foul it would kill you outright, so everyone, even the children, drank beer or wine from dawn to dusk, and the whole era staggered through history in a low-grade communal stupor. This is the polite person's medieval myth. It doesn't sneer at the past. It sounds like science. It comes with its own little mechanism. Brewing sterilizes, you see, and it is so widely repeated that you'll find it in respectable books. It is also flatly contradicted by more or less every medieval person who ever wrote down what they drank, and by the small inconvenient fact that we just spent an entire lie watching a city pipe drinking water 3 miles, because people wanted to drink it. And I owe you a jug. Back in that Huntingdonshire wheat field in 1298, the old widow at the hedge handed you one. Here's what was in it. Water. From the spring by the churchyard, carried out at dawn, stood in the shade all morning with the linen cloth over its mouth to keep the flies honest. And here's the other thing that was at the hedge, because I'm not going to build you a counter myth. Ale. Both. Always both. The entire truth of this lie lives in the space between those two vessels, so let's go haymaking and sort it out properly. It is a shining, heavy afternoon in late June of 1310 in a village in Somerset, and you are mowing hay with a scythe in a river meadow, and you have never been thirstier in your life, and you're 11 years old, and it is your job to fix that. Not the mowing, the thirst. You're the water boy. The mowers move down the meadow in their long staggered line, blades hissing, and you run the line with a wooden costrel, a little flattened barrel on a strap, cool and heavy against your hip. And when a mower straightens, plants his scythe, and lifts 2 fingers, you go to him. You've been taught the route to the spring the way town children are taught the way to church, up the headland, through the alder shade, to where the water comes out of the hillside through a wooden spout some grandfather fitted before anyone can remember, into a stone-lined basin somebody's great-grandfather dug. The overflow runs away down its own little channel. The basin is scoured every spring. On the same day the village beats its parish bounds. It's practically a feast. The well-dressing, the scouring of the spring, children given the job of lifting out every leaf. There are rules about this water, old ones, enforced the usual way, by the manor court and by everyone's mother. No washing at the spring, no steeping flax anywhere near it. The court fined a man 2 years ago for rotting his flax in the stream above the trough, because retting flax poisons water and every soul in the village knows it. Livestock drink downstream at their own place. The spring is for people. Feel it. 'Cause you're 11 and it's June. You kneel at the basin, and the air over the water is a different country, and you plunge the costrel and your arms go into the elbow and the cold climbs your bones like a ladder, and you drink first. Waterboy's privilege, with your whole face in the smell of wet stone and moss, gulping that mineral cold until your teeth ache. Then you fill up, stopper it, and run the meadow line while the costrel gurgles against your hip, and the mowers drink standing, throats working, and hand it back with the empty already sloshing in your imagination, and one of them ruffles your hair with a hand like a wooden rake. Now the noon rest, under the big oak, because here comes the ale, and with it the actual truth. The Lord owes the mowers their harvest food. It's in the custom roll, solemn as any rent. Bread, cheese, pottage, and ale. So many gallons among so many men. The ale comes out in a leather jack, and it is nothing like what you're picturing. It's brewed by the reeve's wife, this batch. Most brewing is done by women, alewives, in ordinary kitchens, and sold and quality checked under a national law. The assize of ale, with official ale tasters, actual sworn village officers, and the court rolls of every manor in England are stuffed with twopenny fines for weak or overpriced brews, often the same cheerfully unrepentant women for 30 years running. It's thickish, bready, faintly sweet, a few days old because it doesn't keep, and the everyday sort, small ale, is so light that a mower can drink a gallon across a working day and cut a straight line to sunset. Nobody here thinks of it as a way to avoid water. It's food. Liquid bread, calories that keep, in a world where every calorie is counted in sweat. A harvestman burning 5,000 of them needs the ale the way a marathon runner needs the sugary drinks. The alcohol is almost incidental, and mostly there because gentle fermentation is how you store barley water for a week without it going sour. So they drank ale when they could get it, water when they couldn't, and often both in the same hour. And how do we know? Because they told us. There is a school book written by the monk Elfric around the year 1000, a Latin conversation manual for boys, and in it the master asks the novice what he drinks, and the boy answers, in a line that should be printed on the back cover of every book that repeats this myth: ale if I have it, water if I have no ale. That's the whole social structure of medieval drinking in 11 words. Ale is preferred. It tastes better and it feeds you. Water is what everybody drinks when the ale runs out, which for the poor is often, and nobody in the entire conversation suggests the water will kill him. The monastic rules assume water at the table. Hermits and strict penitents drink it exclusively, and their biographers admire the austerity, not the survival. The regimen books of the physicians rank waters like wine snobs. Spring water best, then rainwater, then rivers, with practical advice about settling and straining, and note this: boiling suspect water. Advice which only makes sense in a world of people drinking water. Wells sit in every village, every castle yard, every town street, and half the private gardens of London. Wills leave money for their repair, saints' legends bless them, and travellers' accounts praise a good sweet well the way we'd praise a good roadside diner. Peasants in the field, says one 13th-century estate treatise, may be refreshed with water in the heat of the day, not poisoned, refreshed. Where the myth grabs a shred of truth is in the towns, and by now you can guess its shape. Medieval people were choosy about water because they understood perfectly well that some water was dangerous. That's what the conduits were for. That's why London law banned dumping near the conduit heads, why the flax retter got fined, why the physicians wrote chapters on telling good water from bad. A Londoner would drink the great conduit sweet water all day, and wouldn't dip a cup in the Thames below the shambles for a shilling, not because water was cursed, but because that water was obviously foul, and they had noses and eyes and a court system, all of which we've met. They lacked the germ theory. They did not lack sense. Avoiding bad water isn't evidence they feared all water. It's evidence they knew the difference, which is more than the myth gives them credit for. As for the stupor, run the numbers on small ale and you get a population less alcoholic than several modern European nations at their wine-soaked 20th century peak. Yes, medieval people got drunk. Feast days, ale houses, church ales. The court rolls twinkle with the consequences, and stronger ale and wine flowed at every level of society that could pay. But the 7-year-old with his breakfast small ale is swallowing something closer to fizzy porridge than to beer as you know it, and beside his bowl, all day, every day, in every documented corner of the era, stands the thing the myth erased. The jug of plain water, so ordinary that most writers never thought to mention it, the way you don't mention air. That's the deepest trick of this whole lie, actually. The records mention ale constantly because ale cost money and got taxed and fined and legislated. Water was free. Free things leave thin paper trails. Absence from the ledgers got read centuries later as absence from their lives, as if some future historian finding your grocery receipts concluded that you never drank tap water because you never once paid for it. The mowing ends at sundown. You've run the spring path 11 times. Tomorrow your legs will know it was 11. The men sharpen and sheath their blades in the long gold light, and the meadow lies in stripes, and the smell of cut grass is so enormous, so sweet, that years from now, an old man, you'll stop dead in a lane somewhere at a whiff of hay, and be 11 again for 1 full second. You walk home in the dust of the mowers, the empty costrel knocking at your hip like a small wooden heart. At the door your mother hands you supper, bread, a rind of cheese and a cup. Water from the house jar, cool from standing in the north corner, tasting faintly of the glazed clay and of the spring it came from, and you drink it to the bottom without stopping, the way the thirsty drink in the year 1310 unpoisoned, and nobody watching thinks anything of it at all, which is precisely why it took 800 years and a court's worth of documents to prove it happened. Lie number 2. The medieval church hated bathing. Washing was vanity. Vanity was sin. Holy meant filthy. And for 1,000 years Christianity waged war on the human body and won, keeping all of Europe piously unwashed. This is the lie with the best pedigree. It comes with quotations. There are real saints who really did renounce washing, and we will meet them honestly because I promised. But first I want to show you the single most beautiful piece of evidence in this entire episode. It is a drawing made around the year 1165 in coloured inks on parchment, and it survives today bound into a psalter in a Cambridge library. It is a plan of Canterbury Cathedral and its monastery, and it is not a plan of the buildings. It is a plan of the plumbing, every pipe, every tank, every tap. Drawn lovingly in green and red, the spring source outside the city, the conduit line running through orchard and vineyard, the 5 settling tanks, one after another, where the water drops its sediment before it ever reaches a mouth, the pressurized pipes entering the precinct, the great laver in its tower where the monks wash, the branch lines to kitchen, brewhouse, bakehouse, infirmary, fish pond, the rainwater lines, and, drawn with the same care as the high altar, the necessarium, the communal latrine, a monumental stone range with dozens upon dozens of seats, flushed by a purpose-built watercourse that carries everything away underground. The monk who commissioned all this, Prior Wiebert, spent a fortune on it, and his community was so proud of the system that they had it illustrated like scripture. If the medieval church hated washing, somebody forgot to tell the medieval church. Now step inside the drawing. It is a Saturday afternoon in that same decade, in the 1160s, in the Cathedral Priory of Canterbury. The Archbishop himself is away over the sea, deep in his long, famous quarrel with the king, but the house runs on without him, the way great houses do, and you are a laundry servant 17 years old, and your arms are red to the elbow because Saturday is washing day, and today is also, as it happens, feet. You work for the monastery, one of the small army of lay servants nobody puts in the paintings, laundry, bakehouse, kitchen, and your Saturday is built around water the way the monk's day is built around bells. All morning, linen, the undershirts, the bed linen, the towels beyond counting because this house goes through towels like a modern hotel, boiled in the laundry coppers with lye and grey soap, Tossed with the wooden dolly until your shoulders burn, rinsed in the long troughs fed by their own branch of Prior Wibert's pipes, wrung two-man fashion, you and the old laundress twisting against each other like bell-ringers and spread on the drying hedges in the sun. The smell of the laundry court, hot lye, wet stone, scalded wool, sun on linen, is the smell of your whole adolescence, and underneath it always the sound of the system. Water moving in pipes, trickling in the settling tanks, gurgling under the necessarium, the whole precinct quietly running like a mill. Mid-afternoon, the bell you've been waiting for, and you carry the towels to the cloister, because before Vespers on Saturdays the community performs the maundy, the washing of feet, as their rule commands. And here is where the myth walks into a wall 600 years thick. The rule in question is the rule of St. Benedict, written in the 500s, the foundation stone of Western monasticism, and it does not hate the body. It legislates for it, with that flat Roman practicality that made Benedictines the best organised institution in Europe. The sick are to be given baths as often as it is expedient for them. That's the actual instruction, quam expedie, as often as helps, while the healthy and the young are granted them more sparingly. Sparingly, not never. Baths, in the rule, are like meat and wine, a comfort to be rationed, because monks ration all comforts. That's the entire job description, not a sin to be banned. And around that little clause the great abbeys built actual timetables. At Cluny and the houses that followed its customs, the monks bathed at fixed seasons, before Christmas and before Easter, whole ceremonious bath days, tubs lined up in the bathhouse and hot water going like a battle. Shaving was scheduled by rota, heads were washed, and every single day, before every meal, the whole community washed hands at the laver, the long fountain trough by the refectory door, with its gleaming row of little brass taps, where you've refilled the towel rail more times than you could ever count. Feet were washed on Saturdays, guests' feet on arrival, and the feet of the poor at the maundy. Abbots and kings knelt on stone and washed beggars' feet, because their God had done it, which makes foot washing very nearly the holiest thing you can do with water in this entire civilization. So you kneel in the cloister walk with your towels, handing them along the row, and the water in the basins has come 3/4 of a mile through Wibert's pipes, and 5 settling tanks to arrive at the ankles of the poor of Canterbury. And if you'd told anyone present that a future age would believe their church considered washing sinful, you'd have gotten the blank look the truly busy give the truly wrong. And beyond the walls the church's water spreads further still. The great hospitals of the age, and hospitals are almost all church institutions, monastic or episcopal foundations, hundreds of them across Europe by 1200, receive their sick with a wash. The customaries of houses like the Hôtel-Dieu in Paris and St. John's in Jerusalem provide for the bathing of patients, the washing of their clothes, clean linen on the beds, because caring for the body was a work of mercy with its own theology behind it. Monasteries shared their piped water with towns. More than one English city's first public supply was a gift or lease from the local religious house. Church councils fussed over clean linen for altars and clean hands for mass. Priests were instructed to wash before handling the host. The greatest engineering minds of the 12th century wore habits, and what they engineered, over and over, wherever they were given money and a hillside spring, was water supply. Now the honest column, because this lie, unlike the others, grew from a real seed, and you deserve to see it exactly. Yes, there was a strand of Christian asceticism that renounced washing. The Desert Fathers of Egypt spoke of it. Some hermits and holy women of the Middle Ages embraced what the pious called, with a kind of awe, holy filth, refusing the bath as they refused every bodily comfort, wearing their squalor as a hair shirt. A famous church father sniffed that a clean body might signal an unclean soul. Preachers occasionally thundered against the bathhouses, though usually read closely against what people got up to in mixed company there, which, as we're about to see in our final lie, was sometimes a fair cop. All real. But watch the shape of it, because it's the same shape as the dirty hermit in lie number 10. Renouncing the bath only registers a spectacular sacrifice in a world where everyone else is bathing. Nobody wins admiration for giving up something nobody does. The chronicles record the unwashed saints for the same reason they record the saints who ate nothing but bread. Because ordinary Christians, including ordinary monks on their scheduled bath days, at their lavers, in their piped and settling tanked precincts, washed, and everyone knew it, and the exception glowed against that background. The myth took the exception, threw away the background, and called it the rule. Who did the throwing? Later quarrels, mostly. Reformation polemic had every reason to paint the old church as darkness and dirt. Enlightenment writers, at war with priestcraft, sharpened the same picture, and the Victorians, having invented the gospel of soap and water, needed monkish squalor as the before to their after. By the time the historians came back with the actual documents, the customaries, the hospital statutes, the water plans drawn in green and red, the sinful bath story had been in print for 300 years, and print, as this whole episode keeps showing, beats parchment in a foot race even when the parchment is telling the truth. Vespers rings. The last towels are folded, still sun-warm. The drying hedges stand stripped in the low light, and you make your final round of the day, the one you like best, along the laver with your cloth, wiping each little brass tap dry so it won't spot. Small vanity, but the obedientiary praised you for it once, in your first year, and you've never skipped it since. The taps go silver pink in the sunset, one after another, a row of small shines. Under your feet, in the dark of the pipes, the water keeps moving through the drawing you've never seen, filling the tanks by the orchard, resting, clearing, ready for tomorrow's hands. 8.5 centuries from tonight, scholars will unroll that drawing under glass and marvel at it. The water it maps was for washing. The church drew it like a prayer. Lie number 1. Medieval people never bathed. The big one. The lie under all the other lies. That from the fall of Rome to the dawn of the modern age, Europe simply stopped washing its body. No baths, no bathhouses, nothing but a 1,000-year interlude of communal reek between the Roman baths and the modern shower. Everything tonight has been walking toward this one, and I promised you, back at the very beginning, a crier. The man whose shouting hours were written into law. It's time to collect him. It is not yet dawn on a Tuesday in October of 1292, in Paris, the largest city in Western Christendom, 250,000 people packed inside and spilling over the walls, and you're on your knees in the dark feeding a furnace, and the reason you know the law about shouting is that your master has recited it at you, word for word, perhaps 200 times. You're an apprentice étuviste, a bathhouse boy. The house you serve stands on the right bank between a baker and a candle maker, and it has been up and working since 2 hours before you were allowed to make a sound about it, because the guild statutes, real ones, written down 24 years ago, in 1268, when the king's provost Etienne Boileau gathered the rules of every craft in Paris into one great register, The Book of Trades, which survives, which you can read today. The statutes say the criers must not cry until the baths are actually hot. No advertising cold water. So first, the fire. Your world before sunrise is wood and weight. The furnace under the boiler eats logs the length of your arm, and you feed it kneeling on warm stone, cheek scorched on one side, spine cold on the other, in a red half-light with the smell of oak smoke and wet stone and yesterday's soap. Above the fire sits the great copper. Around you, the fabric of the house. The steam room with its tiered wooden benches scrubbed white. The tubs, huge coopered rounds, big enough for 2, 4, 6 people, each with its linen lining so no bather takes a splinter. The pails, the dippers, the sponges, the strigil combs, the folded mountains of towels. Towels again. This entire episode has secretly been about towels and the water you carried. Yesterday, like every day, you and the other apprentice hauled it from the Seine and the nearest fountain by yoke and barrel, trip after trip after trip. And here is the number that finally makes this whole night click into place. Heat is the most expensive thing in the medieval city, not the soap. Soap's a penny. The firewood and the hauling. Every hot bath is a small bonfire plus a morning of human labour, which is why the bathhouse exists at all. One furnace shared is cheap. A private bath is a rich man's luxury. The bathhouse is simply what a civilization builds when it wants to be clean and can't afford it individually. It's the public transport of hot water. The steam comes up right. The master lays his palm flat on the boiler and grunts. And then it happens. The moment that, more than any parchment, kills the myth of the unwashed Middle Ages stone dead. He nods to the crier, and the crier steps out into the grey street and fills his lungs and sings it out. The same call that is at this moment going up all over the city. The baths are hot, come and bathe, the steam is ready, seigneurs, the water is hot and it doesn't lie. And understand what that voice means, echoing off the shuttered houses. It means bathing in Paris is so ordinary, so competitive, so commercial, that the bathhouses tout for the morning trade like bakers crying hot loaves. The tax rolls of this very year, 1292, the great tale of Paris, a street-by-street register of who owed what, preserved for 7 centuries. Count the étuves of the city by the dozens, 26 keepers listed and paying tax under that year's assessment, with more houses uncounted at the margins, an entire recognised industry with its own guild, its own statutes, its own patron saints, its own price controls. Because the prices are in the statutes too. A few deniers for the steam bath, roughly double for a hot tub bath. Set low, capped by law, adjusted only when the price of firewood rises, which the statutes explicitly anticipate, because firewood, as your knees and your scorched cheek could testify, is the whole cost of the trade. A workman's day wage in this city buys multiple visits. This is not a luxury. This is a barber shop, a bathhouse, a public utility priced for the public, and Paris is nothing special. The records show the same houses, the same criers, the same municipal rules in London, where they cluster across the river in Suffolk, in Bruges, in Vienna, in the German towns where the Badstube is as standard as the parish church, in Italy, in Spain. Erfurt's chronicler brags of his town's baths. Every sizable town in 13th century Europe has this morning, this crier, this steam. And then the day pours in, and you spend it the way you spend every day. Waist deep in the humanity of Paris with your sleeves rolled. The wool carder who comes weekly, Saturdays, because his wife makes him. The pair of law students who steam themselves and argue in Latin until the attendant douses them quiet. The old porter with a bad shoulder, who pays his few deniers for the hot soak, and you can watch, actually watch, the pain unclench from his face as he settles into the tub. For some of your regulars this is medicine, prescribed exactly as the physician's regimen books recommend. Bathe to open the pores, to ease the joints, to help the sleepless sleep. Mothers with scrubbed shrieking children, a bride's party the morning before the wedding, giggling behind the partition, because there is a women's side or women's days depending on the house. The statutes and the city fathers spill much ink on keeping the sexes decently apart with mixed success. Which brings us to the part of the truth you'd find most surprising if you time-travelled in. The bathhouse is also fun. People take food in there. The better houses will serve you a meal on a plank laid across the tub. There are manuscript paintings of exactly this. Bathers up to their chests in water, napkins on shoulders, roast fowl and wine on the board, musicians in the corner, and a bath feast is a normal way to celebrate good fortune, the way you'd book a restaurant. Friends bathe together and talk business. Deals get made in the steam. And yes, some houses in every city shade over into something older than commerce. The word stew will end up meaning brothel in English for exactly this reason, and the preachers thunder, and the councils regulate, and the honest keepers, like your master, fume about the disreputable ones down the lane, giving the guild a bad name. It's a human institution, in other words, mostly soap, partly gossip, occasionally scandal. What it is not anywhere in this whole steaming, shouting, tax-paying continent, is absent. So, hold that picture. The crier in the street, the 26 houses on the tax roll, the porter's face unclenching, all of it solid, documented, ordinary, hot water for the price of a loaf, right through the heart of the era you were told never bathed at all. Now watch how it dies, because it does die, and the how and the when is the hinge of this entire night. The fact that turns the biggest lie exactly backwards. Come forward 56 years from your furnace, October 1348. The great mortality is in Paris, the one we met in the wheatfield's future, and the city is a city of bells and pits, and the medical faculty of the university, the most prestigious medical authority in Europe, has issued its official report on the pestilence for the king. And among its conclusions is this: hot baths are dangerous. The reasoning is impeccable and wrong. Disease, says the best science of the age, rides on corrupted air. A hot bath opens the pores. Open pores are open gates. Therefore the steam room, the beloved steam room, is a door standing wide for death. Bathe less, the physicians say, in the plague seasons. And the plague seasons keep coming, wave after wave, decade upon decade, for 300 years. The bathhouses stagger on through the later 1300s and the 1400s, reduced, suspect, closing in the bad years, reopening thinner. And then, around 1500, the second blow. A horrifying new disease is suddenly everywhere in Europe, brought back, most say, from the New World across the ocean. A disease of skin and blood and shame, spread by exactly the kind of intimacy the stews were infamous for, and utterly untreatable. Syphilis empties the bathhouses that plague fear had already half emptied. Now the steam room isn't just a door for bad air. It's a den of contagion in the most literal sense, and the authorities move in. The stews of Southwark, London's ancient bathhouse row, are shut by royal command under Henry VIII in 1546. The French crown orders its bathhouses closed in the same era. Town by town, across the 16th century, the criers go silent. The guilds dissolve. The furnaces cool. The trade your knees served on that October morning in 1292 simply ceases to exist. And what follows, this is the part to keep forever, is the actual age of the unwashed. For roughly 200 years, from the late 1500s deep into the 1700s, educated Europe is afraid of water. Physicians teach that water penetrates and unbalances the body, that a layer of oil and worn linen protects you, that washing should touch the hands and face and nothing else. Cleanliness retreats entirely into the shirt. The linen theory we met at the soap cauldron becomes the whole system. Change the shirt, powder the head, perfume the coat, and the body itself goes years untouched. This is the era of the courts whose habits this channel has already spent a full episode scrubbing into perspective. So tonight I'll spend only one line on the most famous royal example. When you hear that a certain Sun King bathed only a handful of times on doctor's orders, remember that he lived 3 full centuries after the crier sang outside your bathhouse, and that your porter with the bad shoulder, dead and dust long before Versailles was a hunting lodge, took more hot baths in a winter than that King Sentry thought wise in a lifetime. The grubby age is real. It is just not medieval. It is Renaissance, Reformation, Baroque, Enlightenment. The ruffed and powdered centuries, the ones with the gorgeous portraits. The Middle Ages bathed. The age that laughed at the Middle Ages did not. Then the 1800s rediscover water, sea bathing, germ theory, municipal bathhouses, the soap barons and their before and after posters, and the new clean age needing a dark backdrop and not caring to hang its own grandparents there, reaches past them and drapes the darkness over the deep past instead. Hollywood inherits the backdrop, adds mud, and here we are. The whole memory of European hygiene run through backwards. The bathing centuries called filthy, and the filthy centuries called golden. The biggest lie of the 10 and the engine of all the others. Believed, repeated, filmed, and wrong by 300 years in the wrong direction. Back in 1292, none of this has happened, and none of it can be imagined. It's evening now, the last bathers have gone, and the closing of a bathhouse is a liturgy you could do asleep. Drain plugs pulled, the long sigh of the tubs emptying into the drain, linings wrung and hung, benches sluiced, towels, the endless towels, gathered for the morning's laundress. The master counts the day's deniers into the box by candlelight, while the crier eats his supper standing, leaning against the warm flank of the boiler, the way everyone in this house leans against the boiler from November to March. You bank the furnace last of all, rake in the coals into their bed of ash to sleep hot until morning, because tomorrow before dawn you'll kneel here and wake them, and the water will heat, and the master will lay his palm on the copper, and the crier will step out into the grey street and sing to all of Paris that the baths are hot, come and bathe, the steam is ready and the water doesn't lie. He was real. The street was real. The tax roll with the 26 names is lying in an archive in Paris tonight, and the statute about not crying until the water is truly hot is lying in another, and 700 years of mud have not managed to bury either one. The baths were hot. Somebody minded. Somebody always minded. And that is all 10. Let them go now, one by one, the way you set down heavy things, slowly and glad of it. The mud-caked peasant Hollywood built for us can stand down for the night. He was never a person, anyway. He was a costume stitched out of other centuries' failures. Elizabethan sugar teeth, Edinburgh's fly-in pots, the great Styx brown river, the Sun King's dry decades, all of it bundled backwards through time and dumped on people who were, that whole while, boiling their soap and rubbing their teeth with sage and paying their farthing for the hot water. We can apologise to him by remembering him properly. That's the only apology history accepts. And because I promised you at the start that this wouldn't be a whitewash, let's fold the hard truths in with the rest, calmly before sleep. Because they belong to the same picture, and the picture is stronger with them in it. Yes, they had lice, nearly all of them, from the ploughman to the prior, and they fought a patient, losing daily war against them with the fine teeth of those little double-sided combs, and I told you the comb would come back. The archaeologists find them everywhere, in the mud of every century of the Middle Ages, worn down on the fine side. Think about what a worn-down louse comb actually is. It's not evidence of filth, it's evidence of effort. Hundreds of evenings, a mother working a comb through a child's hair by firelight over and over, year upon year, because giving up was the one thing they didn't do. Yes, winter washing was brutal, and plenty of January bodies stayed prudently inside their shirts, and the shirts did the washing instead. Yes, childbirth was dangerous, children died who should not have died, a cut could kill, and when the one great catastrophe finally came, it was worse than anything the modern world has ever endured, and it broke, among 1,000 larger things, the very bathhouses that had steamed for 300 years. All true. All of it lived alongside the courtesy books and the lavender bundles and the crier in the Dawn Street. Human beings are like that. They mop the deck of a leaking ship. It's the best thing about them. So walk back through the whole night one last time, slowly, the lights going out behind us as we go. In Medina del Campo, the inn has gone quiet at last. The ewers are drained and upended on the shelf. The towels are drying in a row by the banked fire, and the girl who poured for the merchants is asleep with her hair still damp and braided, smelling faintly of borrowed soap. In Norwich the rain has settled in for the night, soft on the roofs, and the widow's garden drinks it in the dark. Lavender, hyssop, meadowsweet, all of next summer's stock quietly getting on with it, and her sheets smell of the crop that never made it to market, which was, if we're honest, always the plan. In York the barber's shop is shuttered, the razors oiled and folded, the powder pot lidded, and the apprentice sleeps with the taste of sage and salt in his clean mouth. And across the city the carter sleeps too, poor soul. Properly for the first time in 3 nights, his war over. In the Huntingdonshire village the harvest moon is up for the stripped field. The sheaves are standing in their stooks like a congregation, and the old widow who remembers everyone's grandfather is snoring magnificently. 70-something years strong, with tomorrow's water jug already filled and covered by the door. In Marseille the cauldron cools all night under the harbour stars, the long patience of soap doing its quiet chemistry in the dark, and the apprentice's forearms row their phantom figure-eights through his dreams, while the Crusade fleet's mast lights sway out in the roads. In London, 3 Londons, tonight 3 different years, 1 city. The Gongfer has scrubbed himself pink and sleeps like paid-off royalty. The water-bearer's tankard stands empty by his door, the shoulder groove resting until dawn, and the conduit runs on through the small hours with nobody watching, filling its cistern from 3 miles away, because good infrastructure is the sound of nothing happening. In the Somerset meadow the cut hay breathes its enormous sweetness up at the stars, and the water boy is asleep before his prayers are finished. 11 spring runs deep in his legs, the costrel hanging on its peg like a small wooden heart at rest. In Canterbury the last taps have been wiped to a shine, and the water moves gently in the dark of Prior Wybert's pipes, settling, clearing, patient in its 5 tanks, ready for tomorrow's hands and tomorrow's feet. And in Paris the furnace sleeps banked under its ash, holding its heat the way the whole Middle Ages held its knowledge, quietly underneath, waiting to be raked back into flame. Whoever they really were, the girls who carried the water, the boys who fed the fires, the widows and criers and cobs whose names never made it onto the rolls beside their work, history closed over them gently, and we cannot follow. That was the bargain of borrowing their eyes, and I told you the terms at the start. But the things their hands touched, we still have. The tax roll of 1292 with its 26 bathhouse keepers lies in the archives of Paris tonight, actual parchment in an actual box, and the Book of Trades with its rule about the criers lies near it. The waterworks drawing in its green and red inks lies bound in its psalter in Cambridge, where scholars still lean over it with white gloves. Exeter's water tunnels are open to visitors. You can stoop through them behind a guide with a lamp. The court rolls with Alice Wade's illegal pipe, and the outraged residents of Ebgate sit in London's archives, Latin abbreviations and all. The little double-sided combs lie in their thousands in museum drawers, fine teeth toward the light. None of this is going anywhere. It waited 700 years for us to stop laughing long enough to read it, and it can wait 700 more. And here is the strange, warm thing that happens once you know all this. Your own house changes shape a little in the dark around you. Somewhere near where you're lying right now, there is a room with water in the walls, piped in from a source you've never visited, along a route you've never thought about, maintained by people whose names you'll never learn. And that room is not a modern invention that shames the past. It's the great conduit, finished. It's Prior Wybert's drawing, perfected. It's the Etuvista's furnace, shrunk to a boiler and moved indoors. The soap by your sink is the Marseille cauldron with the patients already done, cut and cured and scented, and the wire that sliced tonight's bars did the same job as the wire in 1248. Your toothbrush is the frayed hazel twig, upgraded. Your laundry basket is the riverbank and the grey soap barrel and the drying hedge folded into a machine. Even the comb in your bathroom drawer, look at it sometime, the fine teeth on the one side, is the direct descendant of the boxwood combs in the museum drawers, and it would fit into a hand from 1292 as naturally as a spoon. Nothing tonight was really about the past. It was about a relay. Buckets to pipes, twigs to brushes, criers to boilers, one long unbroken handing forward of the same stubborn intention. They started it. You're just holding it for now. Because when you strip away the dates and the deniers, what the documents were recording all along in every city and every century we visited tonight was one small repeating decision. The decision to haul the water even though water is heavy, to spend the firewood even though firewood is dear, to comb, to scrub, to strew the herbs, to wash the feet, to find the neighbour, to scour the spring, to line the pit, to wipe the taps dry so they won't spot. Nobody made them do it. No germ theory told them why it mattered. They did it because they wanted to be clean the way people want to be warm and fed and touched. Because it is simply part of the animal, the oldest self-respect there is. And they did it against odds you will never face, in January water, by firelight, with aching hands, forever. And that's the real reason the myth should bother us. And the real reason it doesn't matter anymore, tonight, now that you know. They were not waiting in the dark for us to invent dignity. They had it. It smelled of lavender and wood smoke and lye, and it was theirs. So let the whole thing settle now, the way the water settles in the tanks by the orchard. You don't have to hold any of it. The dates will keep. The tax rolls will keep. The lies are dead for you now. That's permanent. You can't believe them again. You've seen the parchment. And the truth doesn't need you awake to stay true. Feel where you are instead. The bed holding you the way the headshade held the reapers at noon. The sheets against your skin. Cotton or linen washed by a machine that hums the laundress's work in a single hour. Clean the way the collar and cuffs were clean. The old visible score settled in your favour without your lifting a hand. The house around you doing its quiet infrastructure. Water resting in the pipes. Warmth resting in the walls. Everything maintained. Everything minded. Somebody minded. Somebody always minded. Tonight it's the wiring and the water main, and the person who will fix them when they fail. 7 centuries ago it was the wardens of the conduit, and the rakers of the wards and a boy kneeling at a furnace before dawn. It has never once, in all that time, been nobody. You're clean enough, warm enough, human enough. You have a roof and a bed and water in the walls, and that's more than the porter with the bad shoulder had, and he was doing fine. That's enough. It was always enough. Tomorrow there will be water at the turn of a wrist, hot in seconds, the whole apparatus of 8 centuries waiting politely behind the tap. Tomorrow there will be soap that smells however you want it to smell, and clean linen, and the small daily maintenance of the animal, easier for you than for anyone who has ever lived. Tomorrow you can think about all of that, or none of it, which is the luxury the relay was for. But that's tomorrow. Right now, there's nothing to haul, and nothing to heat, and nothing to mind. Right now, the only job left tonight is the one the whole day has been carrying you toward. The one job the medieval world and yours agree on completely. At the end of the washing and the working and the fetching, you lie down and you let go. The same as the girl at the inn, asleep with her braid still damp. The same as the water boy, dreaming his 11 runs to the spring. The same as the apprentice in Paris, warm on the boiler side of the room. The same as all of them, all the way down the centuries, every tired body that ever went to bed clean-handed in the dark. Centuries will pass. The bathroom you know will change beyond recognition, the way the bathhouse changed, the way the conduit changed. The tap will become something you can't imagine. The comb will be printed or grown or gone. The soap will be something a Marseille master couldn't taste for lye. But people will still wash a child's face and call it love, still hand a towel down a row, still walk into warm water at the end of a hard day and feel the pain unclench, exactly the way the old porter felt it, exactly the way you feel it, because that unclenching is older than every document in this story and it does not expire. Some things don't change. The water doesn't change. The wanting to be clean doesn't change. The rest is just plumbing. And plumbing, as you now know better than almost anyone, takes care of itself all night long quietly in the dark with nobody watching. Listen to your house doing it. That hum below hearing. That held stillness in the pipes. The cistern full. The boiler resting. The whole patient system settled and waiting. The way the spring waited under the alders. The way the furnace slept banked under its ash, holding warmth until morning. You can put the whole night down now. Put down the peasant who never existed. He was tired of being laughed at anyway. Put down the tax rolls and the court rolls. The archivists have them. Put down the crier. His shift starts before dawn, and he needs his sleep too. Put down the 10 lies, paid off and closed, and the 10 truths, which will still be true when you wake, and which ask nothing further of you, tonight or ever, except that once, just once, some day, when someone at some dinner table brings up the queen who bathed twice, you'll smile into your cup and know better, and maybe say so gently, and pass the truth 1 seat further down the table. The relay again, the handing forward. It's yours now. It weighs nothing. Your eyes are heavy. Good. That heaviness is the day's honest wage, the same wage the mowers took, the same the laundress took, and it doesn't need to be carried anywhere. It just needs to be spent here, now, on this. And if your mind wants one last thing to hold on the way down, give it the countdown again. But backwards now, and gentler, because the arguing is over. Not lies anymore. Just beads on a string slipping through your fingers one at a time, each one smaller and smoother than the last, the way everything gets smaller and smoother near sleep. 10. A queen who never said the famous thing, and a girl with a brass ewer who never got famous at all, pouring warm water over the dusty hands of tired men, one after another, down the long table, in the firelight, in Castile, the steam rising off the basin, the towel passing from shoulder to hand, manners older than the myth. 9. Lavender by the armful, cut fresh, binding your hands in its smell for a day and your linen for a year. Green rushes going down on a swept floor, meadowsweet under them, breathing honey. Rain beginning over Norwich, and a widow asleep in sheets that smell like her own garden. Somebody minded. 8. Sage and salt in a mortar, ground fine, a wrist aching pleasantly. Linen wrapped round a finger. A merchant of 51 running his tongue over strong teeth and grunting satisfied, like a man inspecting a roof that held. A boy asleep with his mouth clean and tingling, the taste of his trade. 7. A wheat field in August, cut in long swaths, and every age of a whole village bent to it together. The children gleaning, the strong cutting, the old binding, the very old in the head shade with the bread and the jug, holding the whole thing steady, the way old people hold villages. 70 years and 10, read aloud in a stone church, and nobody hearing science fiction. 6. The paddle turning its slow figure 8 through the warm hour after hour, and the master's palm testing the copper, and the curds of white soap rising out of the sand-coloured deep like the moon coming out of cloud. Bars curing on slatted shelves in the dark, whitening slowly, in no hurry at all. Patience, cut with a wire. 5. A hard night's work finished before dawn and paid double for the hardness, and a man scrubbing himself back to sweetness in heated water, coins heavy in his palm while the rakers come out with their brooms and the city smells, to him alone, like a meadow. 4. Sweet water, running downhill 3 miles in the dark of buried pipes, asking nothing of anyone, filling the cistern in the little stone house in the middle of the street. The tap drumming into a wooden tankard, the taste of stone and rushes, somebody long dead having planned ahead. 3. Ale if I have it, water if I have no ale, the whole truth in 11 words, 1,000 years old. A costrel dripping cold from a spring under alders, cut hay breathing its enormous sweetness at the stars, a boy asleep before his prayers are done, and no one minding, not even God. 2. A row of little brass taps wiped dry at sunset, going silver pink, one small shine after another. Water resting in 5 stone tanks, clearing all night, patient as scripture. A drawing in green and red inks folded into a psalter, waiting 8 centuries under glass to be believed. 1. A furnace banked under ash, holding its warmth till morning, towels folded in their mountains, and a voice going out into the grey street before dawn, ringing off the shutters, telling the whole sleeping city the one piece of news that never got written into the myths and never needed to be, because everyone already knew it, because it was simply, ordinarily, documentably true. The baths are hot. Come and bathe. The steam is ready and the water doesn't lie. All 10? Counted down twice now, once awake, once half asleep. And they'll keep without you. Set the string of beads on the nightstand of your mind and leave it there. Nothing tonight needs holding any more. Nothing tonight needs you at all, which is the kindest thing a night can say. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way the warm water took the porter, one slow inch at a time, no hurry, no gate, no toll. Let the pictures loosen and drift, the steam rising, the lavender bundles, the row of small brass taps going silver pink in the sunset, until they're not facts anymore, just weather, just warmth, just colour behind your eyes. Let the sounds go. The criers' call fading down the grey street, the hiss of the scythes, the drum of water into a wooden tankard, the rain on the strewn floors of Norwich, softer and gone. Let your breath find the old rhythm, the figure 8, the slow stir of the paddle through the warm, long and easy and long again. The patience that turns everything eventually into something mild and white and finished. Let the last of it settle to the bottom, the way the sweet water settles in the dark of the 5 stone tanks, clearing all night without being asked. You've earned this rest. Everyone in this story would say so, and they were experts in earned rest, the whole lot of them. Take it. And dream, if you dream at all, of small warm things, steam on cold morning air, a comb moving slowly through firelit hair, clean linen on a hedge in the sun, the figure-8 stir of the paddle, the long patience of water clearing in stone tanks under an orchard, in the dark with nobody watching all night long. The fire is banked, the water is carried, the towels are folded and the linings are wrung, the doors are barred, the taps are wiped dry so they won't spot, and the coals will keep till morning, sleeping red under their blanket of ash, the way you're about to sleep under yours. Everything is done. Everything is minded. It always was. Sleep now. Good night.